In this lecture, I'll be presenting the arguments for and against intelligent design, and my focus will be on William Paley and David Hume. Intelligent design idea is a simple and powerful idea that has not been around just recently. It's been around for over 2,000 years. You find this idea in the early Greek tradition. So here I've taken a quote from Diogenes, who saw intelligent design in the regularity of seasons. And he says that such a distribution would not have been possible without intelligence. And he concludes that the regularity of seasons is the best possible arrangement. And hence, this is intelligently designed. Likewise, Socrates, he concludes intelligent design by the best possible arrangements of mouth, nose, and eyes. So these are certain bodily features. Because of their close proximity, Socrates makes an argument, and in the argument he rules out chance and he concludes intelligent design. So he states that it is not to be admired that the mouth through which the food is conveyed should be placed so near the nose and eyes as to prevent the passage unnoticed of whatever is unfit for nourishment. And then he talks to his student, who's Aristodemus, that's one of his followers, saying, "And can't thou still doubt, Aristodemus, whether a disposition of parts like this should be the work of chance or of wisdom and contrivance?" And Aristodemus was very convinced with Socrates' argument. And he replied saying, "I have no longer any doubts. I have no longer any doubt, because indeed the more I consider it, the more evident it appears to me that man must be the masterpiece of some great artificer." So you can see that such sentiments as Diogenes and Socrates are displaying are a result of a feeling that if something fitted the idea of the way things ought to be, then that was considered evidence for intelligent design. Now, this was a very unsophisticated idea. It didn't have any strong intellectual foundations. In fact, it had very poor intellectual soundness. The rationale they had was that features of nature are as the way things ought to be. So such early design arguments don't really have any methodologically sophisticated underpinnings because they don't consider or rule out any alternative possibilities for explaining these seasons or these features, biological features, with any sophisticated reasoning. But to the credit of Socrates and Diogenes, I must say that it's probably because there was no competition during their time in regards to ideas, because everyone accepted design, so they didn't need to present a sophisticated argument. The argument that the universe and the life it contains is designed was a commonplace for both philosophy and science. So Diogenes and Socrates didn't feel the need to go into the sophisticated detail on trying to counter the alternative possibilities of design that is apparent in nature. So they didn't need to do that because there was no competition during their time. So here is possible counter arguments to Diogenes and Socrates' design argument. So their design argument rests on a simple claim of rightness of seasons for Diogenes and rightness of bodily features for Socrates. So if, say, for example, Diogenes had lived in Hawaii, he probably would argue differently to what he had argued. He probably would say that the best possible arrangement is lack of seasons rather than seasons itself, or regularity of seasons. And that's because Hawaii is very close to the equator and it doesn't have winter seasons, so there is lack of seasons. Simply because Diogenes was located geographically at a place where there was a regularity of seasons, he made an argument based on the rightness of what he considered the season to be. Likewise, if you look at Socrates' argument for design, which rested on the close proximity of mouth to nose and eyes, there's a problem with his reasoning as well. And that is, if you were to argue that if Socrates had his mouth close to his hands, he may have argued that that's very well designed, and that's intelligent design because of convenience, because mouth and hands being close to each other is a convenient feature that allows the transferring of food to mouth more conveniently. But because that's not the case, or Socrates didn't consider that. So this is kind of counter arguments that can be used to undermine the unsophisticated design arguments that were found in early Greek tradition. Now, the pre-Darwinian arguments for design, they had matured over time through Greek philosophy and then through medieval Islamic philosophy and theology, and then also through the Christian philosophy and Jewish philosophies. And then it reached its zenith in the writings of a 19th century Anglican clergyman whose name was William Paley. Now, Paley, he brought a wide scientific scholarship to bear in his writings. So here is a famous opening paragraph of Paley's Natural Theology. You can read the full passage in his book if you wish to do so. I'm only quoting the initial part here. And in there, Paley makes a very long argument, which is known as the watchmaker argument. And you can see that when you read this argument, compared to the early Greek tradition, and Paley's argument is much more improved. He clearly considers the alternatives in developing his argument, unlike the early traditions. Paley expressed his design argument so well that he even earned the respect of dedicated atheistic evolutionary biologists such as Richard Dawkins. Dawkins' book called The Blind Watchmaker takes its title from Paley's watch analogy. Although Dawkins did depart from Paley's watchmaker analogy in respect to who should be given the role of a role as a watchmaker. So Dawkins believed that it's natural selection, if it could be considered for that role, that is the blind watchmaker, rather than what Paley had considered, which is design. Nevertheless, Dawkins was very impressed with the way Paley has made his case, and he writes that Paley derives his point home with beautiful and reverent description of the dissected machinery of life, beginning with the human eye. And then he says, Paley's argument is made with passionate sincerity and is informed by the best biological scholarship of his day, but it is wrong, gloriously and utterly wrong. So Dawkins calling William Paley's argument to be informed by the best biological scholarship of his day. So he's impressed with William Paley's line of thinking and the way he argues the case. Nevertheless, he disagrees on some of the subtleties, such as who should be given the role as a watchmaker. And according to Dawkins, natural selection is the blind watchmaker. So Dawkins' feelings towards Paley are positive, as in terms of biological scholarship, but he says in the concluding part of this statement that Paley was wrong, gloriously, utterly wrong. So his feeling towards Paley seemed to be like like a conqueror towards a worthy but defeated enemy. He pays special tribute to Paley to start off with. Nevertheless, he considers him defeated. Now, why does Dawkins pay special tribute to Paley here? It could be due to various reasons. One of them is that both Dawkins and Paley, they have a shared concern for complexity in life, complexity in biology, or complexity in nature as a whole. So you can see from this statement he makes in The Blind Watchmaker, he's saying that biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. The two key words here in this statement are complicated and design. These are illustrating a shared concern between Dawkins and Paley. Both of them agree that life is complicated, and both of them agree that it appears to be designed. Now, the conclusions they derive from that are different, but the concerns are the same. But Richard Dawkins believes Paley has been defeated. He says Paley is wrong, gloriously, utterly wrong. So he's ridiculing Paley and lumping him with other losers in science, such as the Earth-centered astronomers or those, the phlogiston theorists. So the question many intelligent design proponents ask at this point is, where exactly was Paley wrong? And if he was wrong, who has answered his main argument? This is one of the scientists who regularly asks this question, and he writes in his book called Darwin's Black Box, saying that it is surprising but true that the main argument of the discredited Paley has actually never been refuted. Neither Darwin nor Dawkins, neither science nor philosophy has explained how an irreducibly complex system such as a watch might be produced without a designer. So Behe believes that William Paley had actually set himself up for refutation by unfortunately overreaching and overstating his points. Nevertheless, he still holds that the power of Paley's main argument still remains till today. Despite there being so many flaws in his peripheral arguments, his main argument is still valid. And Behe complains that many neo-Darwinists who refute Paley don't focus on the main argument, they refute the peripheral argument and consider him as refuted. And Behe is not happy with that. He goes on to saying that instead Paley's argument has been sidetracked by attacks on its injudicious examples and off-the-point theological discussions. So Behe is saying that unfortunately Paley had exposed himself to be refuted because he digressed from his main argument. Had he stuck to the main argument, then he would never have been refuted by the neo-Darwinists. But because he gave peripheral examples which were very poor, he then set himself for a refutation by neo-Darwinists. So according to Behe, there are two complaints he has about Paley. The first complaint is that he blames Paley for not framing his argument more tightly. So Behe believes that Paley should have left out the unnecessary theological discussions and the poor examples of systems with interacting components and focused on his main argument. And the second complaint Behe makes in regards to Paley's argument is that he blames the detractors of Paley for refusing to engage his main argument. So the neo-Darwinists don't engage the main argument, and Behe complains about this. And he says that Paley had actually made points that were besides, had made a valid main argument, despite there being points in his natural theology which were besides the main argument, which were the theological points and poor examples, which Behe believes were best left out. So the main argument Paley had made is, how do we explain the origin of an irreducibly complex system such as watch? And Behe believes that this argument still stands till today, and neo-Darwinists haven't refuted this argument. The problem starts when Paley digresses from systems of necessarily interacting components, and instead he starts talking about arrangements that simply fit his personal idea of the way things ought to be. For example, in his opening paragraph, Paley mentions that watches' wheels are made of brass in order to prevent rust. Now, this is where Paley digresses miserably and trouble starts. Why? Because the exact materials, such as brass, is not a necessary requirement for watch to function properly. Brass may help, but watch can function with wheels made of other materials, such as wood or bone. It doesn't necessarily need brass for its functionality. So things get even worse for Paley when he mentions glass cover of the watch, for example. Not only the exact material is not required, the whole component is dispensable. You don't even need a watch cover for function of the watch. The functionality of watch is not dependent on the cover. It is unnecessary. So a watch cover is simply convenience to the watch. It's an addition that's been attached to an irreducibly complex system. It's not part of the system itself. So it's digressions like this which has caused Paley to be refuted miserably.